Hi, I'm Alana Hippenstall from Pharmacy Times. Before we get started, one of our top articles today discusses how the indirect effects of COVID-19 have interacted with the mental health burden of the country. There's more of that on pharmacytimes.com. Today I'm speaking with Ned Milenkovich, principal and co-chair of the Healthcare Law Practice Group at Mutt Shellist, on how federal and state law may affect vaccine administration in accordance with recent declarations by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services authorizing pharmacists to administer vaccines to children during the COVID-19 pandemic and to order and administer an eventual COVID-19 vaccine once it's available. So Ned, could you explain a little bit further what your background in this area is?
Well, thank you very much, Alana. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon to talk about this very interesting topic. My background is I'm a pharmacist, and then I went to law school, and then I married the two professions. So I practice in the area of drug and pharmacy law. I have spent many years in the publication area as well, secondarily as a editorial advisory board member of Pharmacy Times. I had also spent some time with the Illinois State Pharmacy Board for about a decade in my capacity as a pharmacist, but my day-to-day dealings are basically immersed in the law as it relates to drug and pharmacy.
Excellent. Yeah. Following the HHS declaration authorizing pharmacists to order and administer vaccines for patients aged 3 through 18 across the country, the American Pharmacists Association, the National Association of Chain Drugstores, and National Community Pharmacists Association released statements applauding the decision. However, there was an acknowledgement among these organizations of the need for continued effort towards affirmation of this declaration from state governments. Why would such an affirmation on the state level remain important following this federal authorization?
Sure. Well, I think we should take a step back for a moment and talk a little bit about the PrEP Act, which is the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act of 2005. It was actually passed during the Bush administration. And that act authorizes the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, in this case, Alex Azar, who is the current HHS secretary, to issue a declaration that provides immunity from liability, except in the case of willful misconduct, for any claims of loss arising out of the administration or use of countermeasures to disease and those sorts of threats and conditions. So a PrEP Act declaration is specifically for the purpose of providing immunity from liability and is different from other emergency declarations. Normally, the states are the ones that govern the practice of pharmacy, including immunizations. We find that in the Pharmacy Practice Act. We find that in rules that are promulgated by various board members. But we know that not all states are uniform. So the effort by the associations is probably multifaceted, but the effort is intended to get states to not only get on board with the emergency declaration by HHS, which, by the way, is preemptive of state laws, which means they supplant state laws and the federal law actually takes effect over any state law, creates a uniformity, so to speak. But also, I think, to lay the groundwork for a more expansive role for the pharmacist. We know that Secretary Azar has said in an earlier pronouncement that pharmacists should be able to obtain and administer the COVID-19 vaccine when it comes out. But subsequent to that, we saw an expansion of that, and basically stating that pharmacists can immunize, and pharmacy interns under the supervision of the pharmacist can immunize patients aged 3 to 18. And that's really where we see a lot of disparity. So there was some issues there, but at the end of the day, I think what all the associations are trying to promote, and we'll see how it ends up in the end game, but I think what they're looking for is for pharmacy boards and states to step up and provide uniformity and allowing these healthcare professionals a mandate to do what they have to do with vaccinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any potential legal considerations for pharmacists and pharmacies that are planning to deliver vaccines in accordance with both of the HHS authorizations for pharmacists?
Right. So, you know, I would say that every pharmacist needs to be cognizant of whatever their state laws are, regardless of what the emergency declaration holds. Legal considerations might be to understand whether they qualify as a qualified person or a covered person under the PrEP Act for purposes of using the so-called countermeasures under the emergency declaration. And it's kind of a fancy term to say like anything that will help fight the disease in this case, including vaccines. And in the expanded notation, it could be other diseases as well that could precipitate COVID or could morph from COVID into another microorganism. So I think they have to have an understanding of what they need to do to qualify under the PrEP Act, because it does give the pharmacist broad-based powers. And of course, I think they need to understand where their own individual state board of pharmacy sits when it comes to the PrEP Act and the emergency declaration and any of the amendments. One would hope that the states would work in concert with the federal government, but there might not be agreement in that. So it could come to some disagreement. Unfortunately, I think sometimes that does happen, but in this case, one would hope that there would be collaboration.
Yeah, yeah. How do state and federal law interact in regard to immunization planning, distribution, and administration? Have you heard of problems regarding these types of legal considerations for pharmacists?
Typically in a non-COVID environment, state laws, like as I mentioned, by way of the Pharmacy Practice Act, would govern, whether a pharmacist is permitted to immunize, to what extent they can immunize, what patient populations they can immunize, the extent of the types of vaccines that they may immunize with, and so on. Typically the federal government does not play a role here. So the pronouncement that pharmacists should be allowed to do so, and the preemptive nature of the federal PrEP law foists requirements on pharmacists that may overlap with the state law. They may be additive to the state law. So we really have to look at what the state law says, and then what requirements you need to meet as a pharmacist operating under the PrEP Act under this emergency directive.
Yeah, yeah. Upon the release of a COVID-19 vaccine, do you currently see our federal and state systems working in accordance with one another to efficiently and effectively immunize the country? Are there any precedents to consider that could help give perspective to this issue as well?
I do. I really think that we're all, in this together with respect to the virus and how we conduct ourselves on a day-to-day basis. And I think the federal government and the state governments have an opportunity here to work together. I think everyone recognizes the public health threat here, and I believe that the federal government have a duty to act together in the public interest. I mean, ultimately, the PrEP Act preempts, as I said a couple times now, state laws, but it would seem that this could be the beginning of a new era where pharmacists and pharmacies are finally empowered to make independent contributions to the public at large. I mean, we've seen the federal government work with states in the past. Some examples might include during hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters, where there's relaxation of licensure laws across state lines. Another example might be the opioid crisis, where the DEA has worked very closely with state boards of pharmacies to contain drug diversion, as well as recommending dispensing of naloxone type derivatives, which are otherwise known as opioid reversal drugs. I think we saw something on the order of 40 or 42 states develop standing orders, and pharmacists were able to dispense naloxone. So I think there's some history there. Obviously, these are rare occasions, and thank goodness that they are. But I think when it comes to a situation like this, that the states and the federal government, they really ought to work together on something like this to make it happen for the people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, what do you see as the core issues to consider in regard to legal implications of immunization planning, distribution, and administration in the country during the flu season and concurrent COVID-19 pandemic?
Mm. Well, typical immunizations would follow whatever the state mandates are. These countermeasures, such as the COVID-19 vaccine and many other vaccines, for that matter, would need to also meet the requirements of the emergency declaration if the pharmacist were to unilaterally obtain and administer the COVID-19 vaccine. For example, it would require some of the things that a pharmacist would need to do in order to be ascertained as a covered person under the PrEP Act is they would be required to use an FDA-approved vaccine.
Mhm.
They would have to administer that vaccine in accordance with the Advisory Committee on Immunization, or the ACIP, vaccination schedule. They do have to complete 20 hours of ACPE approved training. There's a requirement for basic CPR training. They obviously have to adhere to whatever jurisdictional record keeping and reporting requirements their state has when they're otherwise practicing pharmacy. In some cases, or I should say in all cases, where they're providing immunizations to minors, they're required to provide disclosures. In the case of minors, they need to follow whatever promulgated CDC guidelines the secretary has laid out. So there's a little bit of a laundry list of things there that the pharmacist needs to be aware of when they're engaging in this type of activity.
Right, right, right. Um, Also, how could the COVID-19 pandemic potentially help to shape the future of the legal framework for pharmacists in relation to immunization authorization and other areas of concern?
This represents a massive opportunity for the pharmacy profession to step forward in a meaningful way to assist patients. It provides, like many other things during the pandemic this year, we are finding ourselves inventing new ways of doing old things in order to continue to do what we do on a daily basis.
Mhm.
To have a pharmacist go through this type of exercise where we're potentially days, weeks, months away from a real COVID-19 vaccine, you can only imagine how massive the demand will be for this. And I think what we're going to find ourselves in particular with the PrEP Act and with the emergency declarations, pharmacists are going to be unshackled when it comes to all the administrative, bureaucratic, legal hoops and hurdles that they have to otherwise go through in order to give the patient their vaccine.
Mhm.
And I believe that what happens temporarily has the propensity to become tried, true, and tested.
Yeah.
And perhaps down the road, when that happy day comes that we don't have to deal with the pandemic, someone is going to say, well, it worked during the crisis, why wouldn't it work now? So the opportunity is right there for pharmacists to demonstrate their clinical capability, their ability to go beyond what traditional pharmacists have been doing and really make an impact in patient care.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And what is the value of the pharmacist during the flu season and concurrent COVID-19 pandemic this year?
Well, remember, pharmacists are a first line of defense. They have broad access to patient populations. They have extended hours. Obviously, pharmacies are open a long time.
Mhm.
They have ready access to patients. They have a trusted, hopefully a trusted relationship with many of their patients. And they have direct access to the medical community, to doctors' offices, to hospitals, to nurses. And with the emergency declaration that has been promulgated by Secretary Azar, currently poised to be in effect until October 1 of 2024. Not that that couldn't change. It's a long time horizon, though.
Yeah.
This provides an invaluable built-in runway and a pilot to demonstrate that pharmacists can be independently capable of administering, a broad swath of vaccines with any bureaucratic hoops and hurdles and interprofessional oversight, such as delegation by other prescribers and standing orders. And frankly, I might add, it shouldn't stop there. Pharmacists should be able to assist a patient with infusions, with injections, such as B12, immunomodulating drugs, lifestyle drugs. There's a lot of opportunity there for pharmacists to be involved directly on the front lines, very accessible professional, extremely knowledgeable, and it's really sort of an untapped resource, even though pharmacy has been pushing for its own independence. I think this presents a real opportunity for us pharmacists to move the needle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Ned. Now let's hear from some of our other MJH Life Sciences brands on their latest headlines.